find the Prophet actually gave commentary on very few verses in the Quran. If you look in Al-Bukhari, there's a bab al-tafsir. The Prophet gave commentary on very few verses. He clarified the Quran in his behavior. That is the greatest tafsir of Quran, literally is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But the idea of يَتَدَبَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Don't they contemplate, don't they ponder? If the Prophet literally told us everything the Quran meant, then why would we have to ponder the meanings of the Quran? If he spelt it all out for us, or the Sahaba, so they didn't do this. Why? Because every generation of Muslims have to take it upon themselves to literally study this book and learn to apply the book to their given contextual circumstances, which change with time and place. But the reality of Quran does not change with time and place. It can literally be applied in every time and place, which is the unique nature of the matrix of Quran, is that it will continue to engender interpretations of any human society. Now in the secular society, by taking revelation out, literally, and the Christians were completely done in, the science destroyed them. Science was not able to destroy Islam, and still they have not. The Quran, they've tried to find things in it. They gave up on Quran. They started focusing on the Hadith, because the Quran, it was too difficult for them. The Orientals worked on the Quran and literally gave it up as a project to refute the Quran. You will find very few books that literally refute the Quran. In fact, the only books that they have written actually deal with the differences of the stories in the Old Testament and New Testament and the Quranic versions of them. They point these out, and usually it's simplistic fundamentalist Christians that do this. Real academics actually usually don't do this, because once you start poking holes in the Bible, pretty soon there's no end to the holes you can poke into it. You see, so what they begin to realize is the stories in the Quran actually make more sense than the ones in the Bible. And that's one of the points of the Quran, is it's muhaymin. It's actually an overseer and a guardian of previous revelation. They can see where they went astray and where they deviated by going back to the Quran. And they're forced to do this with the Arabic language. The Hebrews now in Tel Aviv and the places where they do semantical analysis of the Hebraic language, they are literally forced to go to Arabic, because Arabic has been preserved. The Jews didn't start writing dictionaries until after they saw the Muslims do it. It never occurred to them to save and preserve the words at the time when they were revealed. The Muslims began to do this immediately. Ibn Abbas and Ata and Mujahid, they were already preserving the meanings of the words. But not only that, the preservation was included within the preservation of the Jahili poetry, based on contextual meanings of words. So the Quranic Arabic is literally completely preserved. Nobody can come along today and say, this really means this. Because you have to say, what's your proof? And they have to give you a proof from either Jahili Arabic or the way the Arabs understood the meaning of the word based on the preservation of the Arabic language through the great lexicographers of this ummah, like Ibn Manzur, Al-Fayruz Abadi, Al-Asma'i, who was a great collector of meanings of hadith, Raghib al-Isbahani, who literally collected all of the absolutely preserved meanings of this book. So the language was literally completely preserved. And more than that, it is so deeply scientific in its nature, because the precisions of the meanings. Now, one of the great things of the secular worldview is literally a semi-religious vocabulary is given to human beings in which they are indoctrinated through the secular school system. So by the time an individual comes out of the secular school system, he has completely absorbed a worldview. This is the purpose of the secular school system, is to adopt a worldview. Now this worldview has key vocabulary. In the same way what the Quran did when it came down during the time, it took words that the Arabs knew and it added new dimensions. One of the, for example, as Najib Abbas pointed out, about the word Kareem. Kareem, to the Jahili Arabs, was a man who was extravagantly generous. But it was based often on his lineage, his tribal nobility. So he had to uphold the name of his tribe, like Hatim al-Ta'i. Because Hatim al-Ta'i was a Ta'i, which was a generous tribe, and he was their Sayyid, he had to be more generous than anybody else in order to maintain his karam. And if he would renege, on that obligation, which was a tribal obligation, as well as his own sense of personal obligation. It was a tribal obligation because the Arabs did not like to dishonor their tribes. So karam had this meaning. What Islam did, the Quran literally ties the meaning of karam, and it becomes inextricably bound with the idea of taqwa. That karam cannot exist without taqwa. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. So Allah has permanently bound the idea of nobility and generosity with the idea of taqwa. And this can never be broken now within the Arabic language. Because this is, the revelation itself is giving people a worldview, a new way of perceiving reality. This worldview, unfortunately, the Muslims have literally had it taken from them, and they have had it replaced with a secular worldview. And therefore we have Muslims that literally articulate the worldview of the secularists without having any idea that they're doing it. In other words, their minds have literally been colonized. You can colonize a human being's body, but once the chains are broken, you no longer possess him. But once you colonize his mind, you can break the bonds of slavery, this perceived slavery, and you have a slave forever as long as his mind is enslaved and enchained. You see, and this is what happened. The colonials literally came in, and this was the secular worldview. They dealt with Christianity. They destroyed, in the United States, the Catholic and the Catholic Church had the best form of education. They were indoctrinating their people with a religious perspective. The Protestants literally saw their own Protestants began to go into the Catholic, because Protestantism is secularized Catholicism. That's all it is. It is secularized Catholicism. For instance, according to the Roman Catholic Church, usury is one of the grave sins that will put somebody in the hellfire. They believe this in the same way that we believe it, based on the Old Testament. And based on Jesus, according to them, turning the usurers' tables up in the temple and condemning them. The Catholics, in fact, Dante in his Divine Comedy, which is really just a plagiarized ripoff of the Mi'raj, and that's all he did, the 7 heavens and the 7 hells and seeing all these things. He just ripped it off from a description he found in Arabic, and it's considered one of the classics of Western civilization. But and then, a'udhu billah, he in his sick and distorted mind puts the Prophet ﷺ in the hellfire. You see, this is what he does. He stole the whole idea from the Muslims, and that's his thanks. And we know where he's going to be. See, he's going to be, subhanallah. So what Dante did, he put the homosexuals and the sodomites in the same place in hell. What they call now homosexuals. They used to call them sodomites. In fact, they don't even use homo, they say gay. The sodomites he placed in the same circle of hellfire as the usurers. Why did he do that? Because sodomy, according to the Catholic understanding, was a crime against nature. It was against the nature for a male to have a sexual, physical relationship with another male. That is against nature. And anyone that says otherwise is a sick human being. And the Quran talks about when they chase Lut out, the reason they chase him out is because he was purified. So it shows you the sickness of their, in other words, they're so sick that the impurity becomes the norm and the purity becomes the deviance. And this is a sociological principle. Deviation does not mean in sociology, in the same understanding as the Quran, deviation does not mean the bad thing. It means when the norm is good, then evil is deviant. But when evil is the norm, good